Out of all the anime I'm watching this season, this was the one I expected to be at the bottom of the list for a video. I personally handpick a few anime that I think are going to be trash, and it was either going to be this or the dog anime, so I went with this. After seeing some Inukai clips going around, I'm proud to say that I've made the correct decision for my personal sanity and dignity. Just from the description and promotional material, I felt like I was going to be in for a bumpy ride with this anime. The only upside to watching it was that it was made by Studio Bind, the Egg Firm X White Fox collaboration studio responsible for Mushoku Tensei, so at the very least it was going to have good production quality. And after the first episode, my thoughts didn't really change at all. If anything, I felt more convinced that it was just going to be a weird and uncomfortable experience. I'm not going to go into the whole lolly debate rabbit hole because that's a pit from which no life comes out unscathed, but for me personally, it's not something I'm interested in. I mean, the only reason I'm watching ONIMAI now is because it was either this or the Horny Dog anime, so you could say I was stuck between a rock and a hard place on that one. Anyway, I fully assumed my fate was sealed and that I was going to have to hope that no one ever scrolled to the abyss of my low-rated shows on my AnyList to see that I watched this. Episode 2, though, was the start of the change as I did my best not to let preconceptions about the material overshadow what I was actually watching. I started to see the makings of a fun little show about someone genuinely trying to change themselves as a person, albeit under some pretty odd circumstances. Characters are usually the catalyst for me being interested in something, whether or not they're just an endearing personality or I believe they might actually undergo some sort of change. How you see a character initially is going to influence how you see their development. It's part of the reason you see so many characters start off as degenerates or cynical towards the world around them. Once again, mentioning Mushoku Tensei, Rudeus as a main character is compelling to people because he's striving for some level of change in his life, despite a rock-bottom personality as his starting place. For a less extreme example, you could look at Hachiman from Origairu, as he was pretty scornful of the world around him, to seeing his past self as pretty cringy to think about. Of course, it's not enough just to make these changes to the character half-heartedly. How these changes are presented are just as important as the change itself. Origairu did this in 3 seasons with the introduction of the character problems in season 1, addressing those problems in season 2, and resolving them in the final installment. It created a bond with all the characters that drove many people to love the series and hold it in a high regard. ONIMAI takes the same general approach when it comes to this type of character work, though I'd say the starting point is a bit different from usual. I mentioned Rudeus earlier as an example of a degenerate character, and you'd expect that same type of energy from Mahiro and ONIMAI, but it's really not the case. He was a shut-in character who obviously had problems, but outside of that, his personality seemed to be pretty sound. You'd think an anime like this would be sexual in nature based on the description, but I found that it isn't really like that at all. Obviously, considering the nature of a gender bender show, the character has moments where they have to get used to the new body, and some people can be uncomfortable with that, but mostly everything is shown to be pretty tasteful in comparison to other shows that might be doing the same thing. Mahiro as a character doesn't allow the degenerate part of his personality to extend to actual people, and he just keeps to games and anime. This is a great thing, not just for the character, but also for the audience, as it's pretty refreshing to see a, quote, degenerate character actually be pretty normal for the most part. I give ONIMAI a lot of credit for building a cast full of likable characters. The show doesn't really take itself too seriously, so if there was some kind of drama, it wouldn't really fit in too well, so instead just taking the entirely wholesome route has been extremely beneficial for the show. Mahiro as a main character, as I mentioned a minute ago, turned out to be much more compelling than I ever could have expected. Each episode you can tell they're sort of embracing the situation, actually taking the opportunity of this drastic change in their life to make gradual ones that will help them later down the road. Mahiro was more resistant in the first episode, but has since pretty much fully adopted this lifestyle over time, which can be seen through more subtle things like character design. Clothing and hairstyles were pretty static for a bit, but now you see Mahiro wearing normal clothes in the home instead of just a t-shirt, as well as them changing up their hairstyle every now and then. On the more character-oriented side of things, Mahiro has used the premise to take a look back at their life and reflect a bit. You can see Miharu being the more responsible one and kind of step back and wonder where it went wrong. When Mahiro goes back to school and assumes they'll just remember everything they learned from the past, only to flunk most of their tests, they don't sink back into their previous ways of giving up on things, but rather actually self-bans video games for themselves before makeup tests, as Mahiro refuses to be viewed as stupid. There's one more pretty big thing I like about the character, but I'll save that aspect for something I want to talk about a little later in the video. Miharu is also worth her own section as a character, and I'll address the elephant in the room and say, while yes, it's pretty messed up that she went through with this gender change of Mahiro without his knowledge, there's one big thing to consider. It's an anime, it's not real, it doesn't matter. It's a goofy premise to set up a wholesome self-change story, and it doesn't need to be put under a microscope for the morality of it all. Trying to view it as anything more than that is going to take you down a rabbit hole that literally no one cares to go down because it's really just not worth it. Anyway, rant over. Mihari, outside of setting up the premise in a bit of devious way, is a good person. She didn't do it just to mess with Mahiro, but did it out of a desperation of love. She wanted her brother to get his life turned around, and while it was a questionable act, she at least did it with the best of intentions, and for what it's worth, it does seem to be working. The show tends to focus on the sibling relationship as a motivator for both characters. Mihari had always loved and cared for her brother, knowing what kind of person he was, and she wanted him to be able to live a life he could be proud of. She continues to take the initiative in getting him interested in the world, and even Mahiro takes some initiative of his own at times. When Mihari is sick, Mahiro tries, and mostly fails, to do chores around the home for her, and in a later episode it's revealed that she used to talk about him to her friends, and while Mahiro assumed it was just nothing but complaints, Mihari mutters that she didn't say anything mean about him. It's a wholesome sibling duo, which for anime can be kind of rare. I'll quickly mention the side characters as well, though it seems like some of them are going to be much more relevant and recurring than before. The first proper new character we had introduced was Mihari's friend, Kaide. Really, I don't care too much for Gyaro characters personally, as it can be sometimes overdone in cases, but Kaide is just a really good person. Right now, there's not much else behind her character, but the episodes she has been in, she's just been a nice presence to have around, and she really makes Mahiro comfortable, which will help them come more out of their shell. There's also Momiji and her friends, who we don't know too much about right now, but regardless of how much we end up learning about them, they will be good for Mahiro's character overall. Being around a fun, supportive group of friends will help them become more open about talking to others, which is already seen when Mahiro talks to a couple of boys about a video game despite not really knowing them. The last thing I want to mention with this show is some of the controversy that surrounds it. I myself mentioned at the start of the video that I had a bit of a preconceived notion, but the difference between me and other people viewing the show is that I'm open to being wrong about this kind of stuff. I haven't looked too far into the opinions that some people have, but it's obvious that a lot of people are really generalizing the show and not looking too much into it. From what I've seen, Anime News Network writers were pretty open with shitting on the anime, other than like one person who I believe is actually still writing about the show even now. The main character looking like a little girl is always going to rub people the wrong way. It's just how it is, but from what I've seen of the show, if you're sexualizing a lot of what's going on, that's kind of your own problem. The series even puts dialogue in to make it clear that it doesn't want that kind of image. In the second episode, as they visit the bathhouse because their water heater was broken, Mahiro clearly says to his sister that they obviously have no interest in her, so she didn't need to feel embarrassed. It even addresses the issue of him being in a child's body, but obviously is more mature in mind, which a lot of anime just kind of ignore. In the PE locker room, Mahiro feels awkward and doesn't want to look around, and when Momiji and company come to Mahiro's house for a sleepover, Mahiro completely rejects the idea that they should take a bath together instead of separately, and opts to join Mihari, where once again they show they have no interest in each other. The show does have two versions, but the quote censored version is basically just a scale up on the fog and some dialogue changes, and while I watched the original Japanese broadcast version, it shouldn't hurt your watching experience to watch the censored. Japanese distributors basically played it safe with the anime, and since I'm sure they anticipated some of the reaction previously, apparently sites like Crunchyroll may have not even known that there were going to be two versions, so don't go immediately blaming the streaming sites, which I had already done before and kind of regretted now. This is easily one of the biggest surprises for anime I've had in a while, and it's why I like to try out a multitude of different shows, as well as why I don't drop shows. You never really know what you're going to get until you properly sit down and really watch something. Most shows that I think are going to be bad you do end up being bad, but every now and then there is something like ONIMAI that slips through the cracks and justifies my watching of some of the worst pieces of media I've ever had the displeasure of watching. I don't know if Studio Bind just made this simply because they needed some side money during Mushoku production or what, but I'm glad that they were able to bring the series to life in a charming manner, even if some things were exaggerated from the source a bit. I really do honestly recommend this anime if you're able to get over some of the humps that I talked about earlier. It's really worth watching, and it's a fun little feel-good, wholesome anime. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you in another video. Thank you, and goodbye.